Welcome to the High Voltage Light Electric Vehicle channel. As 2023 comes to a close, I wanted to do a bit of a revamp of the channel and get things set up nicely for 2024. I felt that the channel had become stuck in a bit of a loop towards the end of the year, like an endless cycle really of just testing videos, which is a big part of what I do, but I also wanted to do some things that bring us together more as a community within the channel, as well as on Discord. So as well as doing a weekly look at e-bike tech, I thought it would also be fun to share some e-bike stories, good and bad. So I'm going to call this one e-bike triumphs and disasters. So for this first video, I'm going to share a couple of my own. And what would be the greatest though is if people would then send in their own stories. Funny, tragic, inspiring, whatever. Tell me about your greatest bike build and what it did for you, or the best bike adventure you went on. And then I can read them out and share them in a totally confidential way, and we can all have a bit of entertainment, commiseration, camaraderie, maybe learn a thing or two along the way. So I'll start off with probably my biggest disaster, and certainly my most embarrassing disaster on two wheels. And this was actually on an analog bike, but it's a really good story, and you can all have a good laugh at my expense. So this goes back to when I lived in Coventry in England. And if you know about the UK, you'll likely know Coventry as one of those cities that you just drive past on the M6 as fast as possible. Outside of the UK, it's kind of known for two things. The first is that it was bombed to hell in World War II, and there were some pretty big riots there in the 80s. When I lived there though, it was just this pretty grey city, because after the bombing, they just rebuilt everything in concrete, and that really didn't age well at all. I'm being a bit harsh, it's not as bad as that these days, although it's still a pretty bland mix of student accommodation with an IKEA store shoved in. There are some hidden gems though. Coventry was actually the birthplace of the safety bicycle and had a huge, massive bicycle industry. Essentially, the look of the modern mass-produced bicycle was forged in that city to a large extent. As a result, it has this amazing transport museum where you can actually see all sorts of stuff, including that history, but also the Thrust 2 land speed record car, like the actual car, as well as the later on supersonic car, which I think still holds the land speed record. When I was a kid, they actually used to do birthday parties there, and you could sit in this Thrust 2 car. It was really cool. Anyway, this is a bike story. So I used to live in Coventry and travel via train to work in another city. So I would pick up my bike, ride it to the train station, lock the bike up, take the saddle with me, otherwise it would get nicked, get on the train, and then I would get another bike that I had stored where I was going, slot the seat in the saddle, and then ride that to work. And if you're shaking your head at this total madness, I understand. I don't know why I did it. People are weird. I definitely was. So to get to the train station and avoid the Coventry City Ring Road, which is another story in itself, I would cut across this little park, which is basically grass with this huge, massive pond in it. It was inhabited though by hundreds of ducks and geese who were sustained by the local old ladies who used to feed them on copious amounts of breaded products. One morning, I was proper late and I was going through the park too fast, and I see this line of Canada geese crossing over. I just sort of walking one by one over the path. So I judged it so that the geese would clear the path when I was going past, except for some reason the last goose in the line does this 180 straight in front of my wheel. Now, Canada geese are big birds and surprisingly solid. Needless to say, the bike came to an immediate halt and I was catapulted through the air in a shower of feathers and goose shit to land in a crumbled heap some distance away. I sat up and kind of checking myself out for damage, and it mostly seemed to consist of lots of cuts, grazes and bruises. Looked up and this goose was still semi-entangled in the front wheel of my bike, flapping about and making quite a lot of commotion. So I now had to approach this very, very angry goose and somehow extricate it from the spokes without it pecking me somewhere that I would really regret. Limped over and I found this, I don't know where I found it, but I got this stick off the ground and I managed to gingerly accomplish the mission. And this goose gave me the most disgusted look and just waddled off, uninjured, unhurt. You've got to be impressed with her constitution. And I was lucky. I guess, that it was so early in the morning because there was not a whole crowd of people there to laugh at me at the time. There was just a few unconscious park bench residents surrounded by their tenants special. What I could hear though, once things had calmed down, was the ducks laughing at me. And I swear, every morning I rode through that, the ducks would laugh at me as I rode through. Here comes this idiot that hit a goose. Anyway, the day was a write-off. My boss was actually pretty cool about it, and I don't think really, who's going to make that up as an excuse to avoid work? I had the injuries to prove it in any case. The saddest part of the story though is the place that I was rushing to get to was Milton Keynes, which I'm not going to go into here, but it's probably the least inspiring town or city in the UK, and it's definitely not a place you want to be risking life and limb to reach. So anyway, that's probably the worst thing that's happened to me on two wheels. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Maybe someone can beat that. If you're enjoying this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. If you already have, thanks a lot. It apparently makes a big difference to growing the channel and spreading what we do here. In terms of my greatest triumph, I'd have to say it was the completion of the first BBS HD bike that I did, mainly because of what it allowed me to do, and it led to what I think I'll look back on as some of the best days of my life. Back in 2017, we moved to a place called Gatineau, which is a city next to Ottawa, which is the capital city of Canada for people that don't know. Gatineau is in the French-speaking province of Quebec, but in real terms, the two cities form quite a dense urban mass with a large river dividing them. It's also blessed with copious amounts of segregated bike trails running everywhere from the city streets to along the river and into parks. I've never had access to anything approaching it in size and scope since. I realised that I'd be able to take my kids to and from school using my bike and a two-person kid trailer. So I got one of these Weehoo trailers, and great, off we go. It's one of these where you have one kid up front with a set of cranks and one kid in the back behind. And fine, except that it was insanely dangerous. And the main issue I had was that the Salsavai touring frame with drop bars that I was using didn't have the greatest centre of gravity. And it was fine as long as the kids stayed stock still, which, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, that's just not going to happen. Even something as simple as like waving to another biker would be transferred through to the steering, and it would threaten to send the bike either into a tree or oncoming traffic, which would have been probably worse. It was pretty terrifying, and I also didn't want to spend the whole trip yelling at my kids to sit still. I also didn't want to give up on the idea of biking them to school because I thought that would be really cool. In a stroke of genius though, I managed to turn this predicament into getting permission from my wife to buy a fat bike. In one stroke, this lowered the centre of gravity, and through the fat bike tyres provided an amazing amount of stability. It also looked way more badass. The issue then was sheer exhaustion because the school was 5 kilometres each way, and Ontario is a really hot, humid place. I was actually pretty fit at the time, but even so, it was pretty exhausting. I'd heard of the BBS HD a few years earlier. I had a friend back in England that was into e-bikes, and he said to check it out. So after a lot of reading and learning, I ordered a BBS HD and battery from EM3 EV and installed it on the bike. And it's brilliant. It was a huge triumph. This is why it's my triumph, because it literally changed my life very much for the better, although I did get less exercise from then on. I could though now cover huge distances on this awesome trail network in viable time frames without being completely beat at the end of it. The ride to school was something that my kids really looked forward to every day. Unless it was like really hammering with rain, we'd take the bike. I became quite a fixture at the school drop-off time, and it was awesome scything through the lycra-clad office workers on their way to start the day. After the school run, me and my youngest would bike all over, playgrounds, along the river, to the swimming pool, up into Gatineau Park. These are times and years that I will always cherish, and all coming really from the BBS HD conversion of the fat bike. The front part of the trailer had pedals on it, so in theory, my child could contribute to the effort. In practice, it was more a keep them occupied thing. It didn't stop him trying though, and the result was some hilarious interactions with car drivers as they gawped open-mouthed at my kid giving it the beans with me doing absolutely sod all. How is this tiny child powering a fat bike and trailer close to 30 kph? Brilliant. No one even noticed the motor. I'd pull up and have conversations with the police, and all they would ever ask about were how massive the tyres were and about the trailer. Those are big tyres, aren't they? Yes, officer, yes they are. I do like where I live now for many reasons, but I do really miss that network of paths and the commute to school. If you have the opportunity to safely transport your kids about like this, I wholeheartedly recommend it. The impact on their overall well-being is tremendous. After a day at school, we were riding alongside a beautiful river where we could stop and relax and play. So that's my greatest triumph, the building of a fat bike, because of all the opportunity and experience that opened up for me. It also led on eventually to this community, but that's another story for another time. Hopefully you enjoy listening to these tales. I would like to make this a regular feature and tell other people's stories of e-bike triumph and disaster. It can be 100% anonymous. We can change names, nicknames, whatever you want. It can't be as bad as hitting a goose, right? Can it? It can be anything, like what got you into e-biking, what's the best bike you built, how you overcame an engineering challenge. You can send the stories to my email, which will be in the description, as well as directly on the Discord if you're a member of that. Anyway, thanks for listening to this if you got this far, and I will see you in the next video. Oh, and thank you also to all of the channel members. Don't want to forget those guys. Cheers.